Well, I invite you to join me in Ruth chapter 4 this morning. We've come to the end of our series. Today is the last message in the book of Ruth. The best is yet to come. The best is yet to come. The book of Ruth opens with 3 funerals, but it closes with a wedding. And there are a lot of tears shed in the first chapter, but the last chapter is filled with great joy. Psalm 30 and verse 5 tells us, "Weeping may last for the night, but a shout of joy comes in the morning." Now, not all of the stories have this kind of happy ending. But this little book reminds us that for the Christian, the best is yet to come. There's a couple scenes in this chapter. The first scene is in the first 12 verses, taking care of business. Follow along with me here in Ruth chapter 4. Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. Behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the closest relative, "Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance." And the closest relative said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, because I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it." Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and the exchange of land to confirm any matter. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. So the closest relative said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself." And he removed his sandal, and then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today." And all the people who were in the court and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel. And may you achieve wealth and become famous in Bethlehem. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman." So what's going on here? Boaz goes up to the city gate. That's where they took care of official business. And in the presence of several of the elders of the city, he makes an offer to the closer relative, the one who could be the kinsman redeemer, and redeem the land and marry Ruth. So he makes this offer, and notice that this man's name is never mentioned. Now, there's probably a significant reason for that, but let's just call him John Doe. So John Doe agrees to redeem the land. And at this point, we're all probably thinking, no, we don't want him to do that. Boaz is supposed to be the one. We want Boaz to be the redeemer. Oh yeah, by the way, Boaz tells John Doe that on the day that he redeems the land, he has to also marry Ruth and raise up children who would one day inherit the land. Now, John Doe has a quick change of mind here. He doesn't want it after all. It's going to jeopardize his own inheritance. And so he gave his redemption right to Boaz, the next closest relative. Now, to finalize the deal in the presence of all those elders and all the witnesses that were there, they traded sandals. Now, this custom probably signifies that the man was given the authority now to walk on the other man's property as the new owner. And now everyone's thinking, yes, we want Boaz. And the elders bless Boaz, wish upon him great wealth and fame in Bethlehem, many children, and Boaz goes on his way. Scene 2, we see the marriage and a child. Verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord enabled her, to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. And the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is better to you than 7 sons, as has given birth to him." Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron, and to Hezron was born Ram, to Ram Amminadab, and to Amminadab was born Nahshon, and to Nahshon Salmon, and to Salmon was born Boaz, and to Boaz Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse David. So we read here in this section that Boaz and Ruth are married. Very little is said of it. But you know it had to be a beautiful marriage, a beautiful wedding. Very meaningful ceremony, I would have thought, for the both of them. They've been looking forward to this. They've been hoping for this. They've been praying for this. And now here it was. It was a day of great rejoicing, a day of happiness. It also says that Ruth had a son. Now think about this. For 10 years, she's unable to have children with her first husband back in Moab. Suddenly now God allows her to have a son. So out of brokenness and sorrow in chapter 1, God faithfully brought hope and a future to the family. The text tells us that Obed would be the grandfather of King David. We all know about King David, right? It's through that family line that Jesus Christ would come. So what do we learn from the story of Ruth? Well, when we come into a relationship with God, we realize a couple of things. One, that God has a way of working things out. This really picks up much of what we've looked at the first message in Ruth chapter 1, that God is provident over all circumstances in our lives to accomplish all things that He wants to accomplish for our good and for His glory. Now, from a human perspective, this matter of settling the legal issue between Boaz and this other nearest kinsman, that was probably a matter of great anxiety for Ruth and Naomi. Just having to sit back and wait, wondering what's going to happen. Is Boaz going to be able to work things out? Is this other man not going to allow Boaz to redeem the property and marry Ruth? Probably caused some stress in their lives as they just waited. But it didn't cause any anxiety and stress in the mind of God, because He has a way of working things out just the way He plans. I mean, can you really imagine God saying, "Oh no, I'm sorry, Boaz and Ruth, I couldn't fulfill my plans for your life because your relative John Doe outwitted me and figured out a way to sneak in and mess things up"? That would be crazy. And yet, if we're really honest with ourselves this morning, I would bet that we've all struggled at times at wondering if God's will had been missed in our lives. We think maybe, perhaps, God just may have overlooked something in my life. It seems as if Satan has snuck in and outwitted God's plans for my life. But Psalm 33 and verse 11 says, "The counsel of the Lord stands forever, the plans of His heart from generation to generation. They cannot be and will not be outwitted, messed up." God has a way of working things out. God was orchestrating this entire beautiful romance between Boaz and Ruth. He intended to bring them to marriage. He had put that hope in their hearts, not to lead to a dead end, but to lead to marriage, His plan for them. God's will for Boaz and for Ruth was that Boaz would be the kinsman redeemer and would one day be Ruth's husband. And nothing was going to prevent that from happening. Now, several years ago, there was a movie entitled Rudy. Maybe you've seen it. It was a true story about a young man who dreamed all his life about playing football for Notre Dame. And everyone laughed at him. Everyone mocked him. He was pretty little for a football player. And in his struggles through it all, he begins to develop a relationship with the elderly priest on campus. And as they were talking one day about Rudy's ambitions to make the team, the priest gave some good advice. He said, "In all of my life, I've come to the conclusion that there are two things that I know with all confidence. Number one, there is a God. Number two, I'm not Him." I think that's pretty good advice. When we struggle through some things in life, wondering, is it actually going to happen? Is what I'm hoping for going to happen? Is God's plan going to work out in my life? Number one, there is a God. He's working. Number two, I'm not Him. So I just have to let Him work and accomplish His plans, whatever they may be. So here's my challenge to you. Trust in Him. Trust in Him. Trust God with your whole life. You can't be in a safer place than in His hands. Psalms 46 and verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." Be still. I know that's hard, but trust Him. Just be still and trust Him. Entrust into the hands of God your health, your job, this church, your marriage, your family, money, friends, your time, your pains and disappointments. Trust Him with your whole life. Rest in His faithful hands. God is in control. His purpose for your life will not be and cannot be thwarted. Trust Him. He has a way of working things out. The second thing I think we realize when we come into a relationship with God is that what is impossible for us is possible for God. What are some of the impossibilities in the book of Ruth? That it seemed impossible that God would ever show favor toward these poor women who have lost their husbands in Moab and now are just struggling to survive. It seemed impossible that Naomi would ever be happy again. You remember her statement in Ruth chapter 1 and verse 21? When she comes back to Bethlehem, she says, "I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty." Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has afflicted me? She's having a pity party for herself, sort of. And it seems impossible that she would ever be happy again. It seemed impossible for Ruth that she would ever marry again, being a foreigner, now living in Bethlehem, who has committed herself to look after her mother-in-law, Naomi. It may have seemed impossible that Ruth would ever have a baby. She had been barren for 10 years of her first marriage. What seemed impossible in their eyes was possible for God. What are some of the things that seem impossible in your eyes, yet indeed are very possible by the will and power of God? It may seem impossible to see our church grow to the size that it once was, or have significant influence in our community. It may seem impossible for the hardened heart to ever soften and accept Jesus Christ as Savior. It may seem impossible for there to be forgiveness between fighting family members. It may seem impossible for the prodigal son or daughter to ever come back to the Lord. It may seem impossible that God would ever accept me back again when I failed Him so miserably. But what is impossible for us is possible for God. So I challenge you, hope in Him. Never close the door on God. Never give up on hope, on His love, on His grace and goodness and provision. Because the third thing that we learn is the best is yet to come. Isn't it just wonderful how simple and easy life is? I don't see too many people agreeing with me on that one. No, we all know that in reality the road of life is anything but smooth. It's got a lot of potholes and obstacles and detours. I think that would be a fair way to describe Ruth and Naomi's life experiences. I like the way John Piper said it in his book, A Sweet and Bitter Providence. He said, life is not a straight line leading from one blessing to the next, and then finally to heaven. Life is a winding and troubled road, switchback after switchback. At the point of the point of biblical stories like Joseph and Job and Esther and Ruth is to help us feel in our bones, not just know in our heads, that God is for us in all these strange turns. God is not just showing up after the trouble and cleaning up. He is plotting the course, managing the troubles with far-reaching purposes for our good and for His glory. I don't think these women could have ever dreamed of all the blessings that would come out of the sorrow that they were experiencing. But with hopeful hearts, they responded in faith to the romance of God and His providential leading in their life. And God turned despair into delight, sorrow into salvation, brokenness into blessing, pessimism into praise. And we learn that this new baby, Obed, becomes the grandfather of Israel's great King David. And yes, David was the ancestor of Jesus Christ, the kinsman redeemer of the world. And so I challenge you, praise Him. Give continual praise to God, because the best is yet to come. I don't know where you are at in your spiritual journey. Maybe you're still in Ruth chapter 1, feeling the heaviness and sorrow and pain. Even so, God is romancing you to come to the end of yourself and find the beginning of Him and His grace. Maybe you're in chapter 2, wandering through life looking for refuge. God is romancing you to find refuge under His wings. Maybe some of you are in chapter 3 this morning and you need to find salvation, but you don't know how to. Or maybe you are a follower of Jesus Christ already, but you just need a fresh start. God is romancing you to go to the threshing floor and find, by faith, your kinsman redeemer, Jesus Christ. Maybe some of you are rejoicing in Ruth chapter 4. Just glowing with the joy of God's goodness in your life. God is still romancing you to hold on, because the best is yet to come. You see the story of Ruth? It's really God's love story for us. God bless.